Hi, this is Dave Borton, Mill City Roasters, along with
Joe Morocco, Cafe Imports.
Today, we're looking at Beyond First Crack, or something to the effect of burning the hell out of the beans. Joe cleaned it up for GP audiences. Beyond First Crack. In roaster school for these last 5 weeks, we've been looking at the different stages of roasting, and Joe is going to take us from first crack and beyond today. So Joe, I know we're going to get into science, so I'm going to sit back and relax. It's all yours, my friend.
Sounds good. Thank you, sir. Yes, we are going to talk about what happens after first crack, including second crack and beyond. So often, beginning roasters especially are roasting well beyond first crack into those darker realms of coffee that we call second crack. There are...
Dark side.
Yes, the dark side. You've got to start in the dark side in order to pull yourself back toward the light side at times.
There you go.
So coffee is this really cool product that starts out with so much potential and so many variances. However, the vast majority of coffee that is drank around the world is something that I would call nostalgic coffee, or that coffee. The flavor of coffee that is so ubiquitous with all of the coffee that you taste. And the way that ubiquity happens is through roasting all of the coffees beyond first crack and into, or maybe even beyond, second crack. So in other words, you can take all of the dynamics that are in these various coffees and bring them to one homogeneous characteristic of just coffee. And we don't really like to do that in specialty coffee. We consider coffees to be unique based on where they're grown, how they're processed, the variety, the altitude. And that's why, for the most part, you'll hear Dave and I teach that you should never move too far into second crack, because you're taking all of that lovely characteristic, all of the things you paid a little extra money for, and you're homogenizing that. You're burning it out of the coffee. However, there are times and places where roasting a coffee more darkly is appropriate. And as we have said in this program before, roasting is not a moral endeavor.
Amen.
It is an aesthetic endeavor. Now, moving into second crack, past second crack, there is a third crack. At third crack, that is where it becomes a moral endeavor. Okay, I'm just kidding. We want to make sure that no matter how we're roasting, that we know our target, we have our target in mind, and we're able to hit that target. And so that's why today we are going to talk about second crack. We are going to talk about roasting a little bit more dark, because that may be something that you at some point want to do, and you should have the tools in your toolbox to execute that, execute it well, and execute it repeatedly. Dave and I were speaking before this, and even he and I have differing opinions on how to approach second crack, and we're going to get into some of that too. So what happens? Okay, so here you drop the coffee in, you have the turning point, it goes through yellow, you go through your development time prior to first crack, development time after first crack, and then all of the compounds that are in the coffee, they continue to go down their domino effect, their chain of reactions, to the point where they have dissipated so much that eventually they leave behind the carbon skeletal frame of the molecules that they once were. Now, within coffee, there are a lot of resources out there that use terminology that I have listed here. And I want you to know that this is actually not what's happening within coffee. Generally, these three things need very high temperatures, and they're happening to much more complex molecular structures than are in organic material. Like, for instance, dry distillation, carbonization, well, all of these happen in places like a volcano or something like that. Usually there needs to be a void of oxygen. Now, there are subtle snippets of these reactions that are taking place in coffee, but I'm going to simplify all of these. I'm just going to cross these out. And I'm going to write charring. This is what's happening to your coffee as you are moving it forward through the roast. Of course, some of these things can kind of happen, but these are very complex physical things that take place at very high temperatures. So we're going to focus just on charring, because charring not only speaks to what is physically happening in the coffee, but it's also speaking to the flavor that you get out of the coffee and the visual cues that you get within the coffee. So it's a really good term. And what does charring mean? Well, charring means that you are getting flavors of burning. If you take a steak, for instance, and you sear that steak off on both sides, and then you cook it to where the middle is nice and medium rare, you will still get some flavors of charring. And that adds to the complexity of that piece of meat. It adds to the flavor. You go through the Maillard reaction on that piece of meat, and then past that, you start to burn up those compounds that are on the exterior part of that piece of meat, and you get a little bit of carbony flavor. Carbony flavors, charring flavors, are bitter. They're usually pretty much the same, whether you get a charring flavor on a piece of meat or a cookie or whatever it is. They're pretty much the same, coffee. But they add to the complexity of that coffee. So there are different ways that you can go about approaching that charring, and whether or not you want to preserve the flavors that were there prior to the charring, like you would on a medium rare steak, or whether you want the coffee itself all the way through to taste more on the char side. So why would you ever want to do that? Well, if you get that coffee that is defective, or there's something, it's getting too old, or there's something about the coffee that is negative, you can actually cook those flavors out by changing those compounds that are making the negative flavor into flavors of charring. Some people prefer darker roasts of coffee because they actually enjoy this flavor in a big way. And so they prefer a dark roast because charring is a flavor that we here referred to as robust or strong or intense. It's one unique flavor that can be overpowering in the cup.